Hello and welcome to the fourth and final webinar in the Connecting for Climate Change series from Innovate UK KTN. This session is part of Innovate UK KTN's programme of webinars exploring how we can convert the agreements from COP26 into reality, kickstarting the right conversations and collaborations following the Climate Change Conference. My name is Paul English and it's my pleasure once again to be hosting today's event from my home here in Glasgow in what I hope will be a very interesting, informative and inspirational session as we look back on the key outcomes of the Climate Summit in Glasgow and ahead at how to make those ambitions a reality. The aim of these sessions so far has been to bring together Innovate UK KTN's network of researchers, innovators and experts who help drive our global society and economy towards net zero. Our panelists have discussed the challenges we face and considered how we can best work together to achieve them. Among other things today, our panel will discuss the priorities identified at COP26 and how we can speed the journey from innovative ideas to the implementation of practical solutions. We will share information on the systems currently in place that nurture innovations from idea to market and highlight where things could improve. In just a minute, I'll introduce our panel of 5 today, but before I do, just a quick reminder that you can visit the Innovate UK KTN website to learn more about how to make the most of the network for your business and catch our other sessions in the series on the UK KTN YouTube channel. So COP26 is already a thing of the past here in Glasgow, although the delivery of the Glasgow Climate Pact should ensure that the summit's legacy remains on the international agenda for years to come. New schedules might have already moved on, but the aims and ambitions of those 2 weeks here in the banks of the Clyde last month remain the focus of those working towards the commitments made. The headline outcomes from that 2-week spell: reducing the use of coal as an energy source, albeit phased down rather than phased out, increase funding to help poorer countries deal with the effect of climate change and facilitate transitions to clean energy, China and the US agreeing to cooperate more around the switch to cleaner energy, and the pledge to bring an end to deforestation by 2030. Last week, our panel discussed Resilient Places, a session you can watch again on the Innovate UK KTN YouTube channel. And this week, a new panel of guests are here to discuss the issues around the importance of enabling action as part of our drive towards net zero. With that in mind, what is the challenge? How do we ensure innovative ideas on how to tackle climate change are sufficiently developed to become practical solutions? How can we ensure the best solutions make it out of research institutions? How can we improve the links between research, business and policy making to enable solutions to thrive? Where does your business or institution fit into this ecosystem? And where can you turn to find support to speed up the implementation of your ideas? Fundamentally, the challenge is getting products from feasibility to prototype to production and route to market. But how best to achieve this? To discuss all that today, please welcome our panel of speakers. Firstly, Dr. Alicia Grated. Alicia is the Chief Executive Officer of Innovate UK KTN. Innovate UK KTN connects innovators with new partners and opportunities to accelerate ideas into real-world solutions. Previously, Alicia was Global Director, Research Engagement at Heriot-Watt University, and prior to that, led the Newton Fund on behalf of the UK Government. Alicia was Founder and Director of Research Council UK India at the British High Commission and Director RC UK China at the British Embassy in Beijing. She's also worked in several senior roles in the UK research councils. Alicia is a fellow of the Institution of Engineering and Technology and a member of the government's Jet Zero Council. She is also a member of a number of advisory bodies, including the Royal Society Science, Industry and Translation Committee and the Scottish Funding Council's Research and Knowledge Exchange Committee. Welcome, Alicia.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
Susanna McClintock. Susanna is Investment Director at Sustainable Ventures. Sustainable Ventures supports and invests in companies whose core business models address the challenges of climate change and resource scarcity. At Sustainable Ventures, Susanna leads investment and accelerator activities for early stage startups. Susanna holds more than 20 years' experience in startup growth and finance. She's passionate about business models which aim to maximise their use of funds and resources to create sustainable enterprises that achieve specific environmental or social outcomes. She holds board and trustee positions for both startups and charities focused on environmental and social outcomes, and is an advocate for female entrepreneurs and the founder of 513.org, a not-for-profit which increases investment flows to female entrepreneurs. Susanna also leads the finance initiatives for the Mayor of London's Women in Clean Tech programme. Hello, Susanna.
Hi, Paul. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for having me.
Next up, Kit Brennan. Kit is one of the founders of Thrust Carbon, an award-winning technology company that makes it effortless to calculate, analyse and reduce the carbon footprint of business travel. Clients include leading TMCs, as well as Fortune 500 enterprises such as Novartis and S&P Global. Day to day, Kit heads up the business's product offering and calculation methodology. Hello, Kit.
Hey, great to be here.
Anthony Finbo. Anthony is CEO of Eagle Genomics and for over 2 decades has scaled deep technology businesses. He's Vice Chairman of the Bioindustry Association's Genomics Advisory Committee, supporting the UK's genomics sector. Anthony is also on the advisory board of the UK's KTN Microbiome Innovation Network. Hello, Anthony.
Hi, Paul. Hi, everyone. Delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Anthony. Phil White. Phil is passionate about building companies that have a positive impact on our planet. He is an entrepreneur, executive manager in construction, and speaker in innovation, sustainability, and the circular economy. He's also the founder of Cloud Cycle, which has developed technology to help the concrete industry slash costs, waste, and carbon dioxide, whilst improving concrete quality and operations. Welcome to you, Phil. You're on mute there, Phil.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hello, welcome. Okay, so the first question to you all today. The need for net zero is global. How do businesses and policymakers best ensure that innovation created in the UK or elsewhere is made affordable, scalable, and transferable enough to drive change across the world? First question to you, Alicia.
I was hoping you weren't going to do that to me, Paul, because that's like the biggest question ever. So I'll just kick it off because I'm sure everyone will have views on this. So you said in the introduction, like I spent time in India and China, and I think we all know it here, everybody listening as well, that innovation is worthless unless it's got a place to go, unless it's going to make a difference and have an impact on people's lives, ultimately, a positive impact. So it's interesting living in those countries, you know, you see such different challenges that people are facing. In India, they lose half their food just from it being transported, and that's partly to do with refrigeration, right? Refrigeration uses loads of energy. And then in China, it was really interesting because the policy environment is very different. So government will make decisions for the whole country and everyone follows this direction, right? So I think the main thing I'd say is, you know, it's about listening, it's about being open-minded, it's about not exposing yourself, it's about seeing other cultures and genuinely listening and trying to understand those and working with others to understand the needs. Because it's very easy for us to sit in our lovely houses here working out what someone needs in another country that we think we understand. And that could apply to anywhere. It could apply to me sitting in Scotland thinking about London. So I think it's about really listening, collaborating, and allowing yourself to really understand those challenges that other people are facing before you set on your journey, or as you go on your journey with others.
Okay, thanks, Alicia. Susanna?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think that a lot of solutions will be quite regionally specific. They'll be driven by local regulation, existing infrastructure, weather patterns, or what the, if we think about housing being a huge challenge, whether we're in a heating environment or a cooling environment based on the local housing stock. So I do think we have a super challenging getting our own house in order. But of course, there's an obvious point about carbon not recognising borders. So to kind of build on Alicia's point about listening, I think where possible, we need to think about designing for internationalisation or for universal use, and to think about how other countries can kind of contribute to being part of the solution. Our solutions, both of now and of the future, need international supply chains. And we need to be, thinking about how to integrate those sensibly and not to outsource our emissions to them, but to recognise how our whole international supply chain comes into it. On a practical level, I've seen great success around kind of trade partnerships, trade corridors, kind of group missions to go and find parts of the supply chain technology in particular countries. So collaboration, listening to experts globally, and going out and recognising the rest of the world is definitely critical in building our own solutions.
Okay, thanks, Susanna. Anthony, your thoughts?
Well, I think that, look, I've been a 25-year entrepreneur building venture capital-backed businesses, and I see something changing slowly, but hopefully slowly then fast, which is that there's been so much in my career focus on point solutions to solve, to generate a profit, to exit, to return. And I think now we're starting to see, certainly coming out of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the World Economic Forum, EIT Food, KTN itself, and the UN Climate Innovation Group, a call for systems change. And that's a super high level concept, but if we think about it, incentives for people with money to invest in funds that are trying to transform the way we live, the way we subsist, the way we grow our food, the way we produce energy, and then figuring out that the mandates for those funds are to drive to invest in the most compelling businesses that can make a more systematic change is the potential opportunity. And we're seeing smart money move towards these funds. And I have a lot of enthusiasm and excitement for the fact that we're seeing some of the most clever investors in the world vector towards transforming the way towards a more circular economy, a more generative economy, a nature-inspired economy, or the principles of nature co-design. And I think we need to think about the systems rather than the point solutions, which is where investors have been generally focused, in my experience through the last 20 years or so. Because the great thing about point solutions is you might be able to see a return with a simple narrative, I get that. But you might not really understand the unintended consequences of doing that. And look, I'm a fan, so I want to caveat this comment. But when I look at the moment to vertical farming, for instance, where we're taking plants out of the soil, we're building sky-high plastic racks, exposing these poor creatures to light 24 hours a day, in the hope that we're going to solve world hunger and solve the energy challenges and solve climate change with that. It fills me with fear and dread because we're not understanding the nature and how nature functions in this circular way. We're not understanding the contribution of soil to nurturing and providing nutritional content to plants. And we're not understanding the downstream effects of growing plants in this way and how they will impact human health. So that's just an example. I think I'm not saying we shouldn't be looking at vertical farming, but what I'm saying is we need to figure out how we're delivering vertical farming technologies that understand the contribution of nature, the capital contribution of nature to solving here. That's just one example.
Kit and Anthony, I'll come. Sorry, Kit and Phil, I'll come to you in a second. But just picking up on that point a little bit further there, Anthony, you mentioned nature co-design. That strikes me as something. A lot of what was coming out of COP26, I think, was almost sort of subconsciously required to capture the imagination of the kind of, casually viewing public who are tuning in to watch news reports and maybe following the issues raised a little more closely than they would in a day-to-day sense. Can you give us an example of, natural co-design that you think, whether it was discussed at COP26 or whether it's out there in the world having already been successfully implemented, having gone from the point of innovation through to actual rollout, that would have captured the imagination, or perhaps as a gold standard example?
Well, I think one of the criticisms of the outcome of COP26 was that a lot of the solutions proposed are built on the back of technology that doesn't yet exist, and it's difficult to cite individual examples. But we're seeing transformation, I would say. Just back to that particular case I talked about before. We're recognizing that agriculture and farming is a massive contributor. As much as 17% of carbon emissions are generated from agriculture practices and farming. And we've been for 50 to 100 years, or 100 to 50 years rather, looking at fertilizing crops using Haber-Bosch chemical processes to nitrogenate soil, and that's disintermediating microbial ecologies in the soil, and the microbes interacting with plants at the root. That conversation between plant and microbe is broken down because of this approach. So we're now seeing major companies like Bayer, for instance, investing heavily on regeneration of soil, understanding how nature enables the transmission of nutrients from microbe and soil to plant through this interaction, and trying to figure out different ways of nurturing crops, but using nature as the fundament and the basis. And I think that's a point example of the much more significant narrative, which is that through this better, deeper understanding of how nature operates, we're inspiring the next economy, and we're at the end phase of the digital age, if you like. And I'm not saying digital is going away, but we are at the beginning of what some organizations like McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group describe as the bioeconomy, or the fourth industrial revolution, which is going to be largely bio-inspired. And so you're just seeing the beginnings of, certainly seeing investment move to this domain, and you're seeing the beginnings of suggested solutions. But I think it's early. There's a hell of a long way to go. We're talking about 50 to 100 year cycles. I know we don't have 50 years, but if we start to make the changes, then I'm optimistic. But it's difficult for me, Paul, to identify a cradle to grave example of where this is working currently.
Okay. Yeah, still interested in the notion of a fourth industrial revolution with a green filter. It certainly it feeds the imagination for sure. Phil, back to the original question: how do we make the innovations that of here and now tell? How do we make them successfully? How do we get them out there and into the world where they're making a viable contribution and a tellable difference?
I guess you can look at this from two ends. So there's there's the enabling the innovation in the first place, and then there's the having the innovation somewhere to go, like was mentioned earlier. And when we found that, so we're a B2B, dealing with some of the world's largest concrete companies, largest projects, and these big conglomerates. And what we're finding is, we've worked with Innovate UK and KTN, and we've got amazing funding from them, and we've got the innovation up and running, and we're almost at that product market fit. We're ready to launch into market. And then we're speaking to these big kind of corporates, and it's like, oh, well, you need to integrate into our technology now. So then we've got to go away and fund that and build that. And they've got to go away and build their end and pay for it and invest in it. And what I'm finding is there isn't this kind of ubiquitous protocol where we can just go, hey, we're working on net zero technologies, we want to integrate into your tech stack. There isn't one tech stack for this. Every company is using their own technologies and their own different tech stacks, and AWS and Microsoft and different versions of BIM, for example, in construction. So as a startup, it's kind of like, well, which horse do we back, and how do we, where do we invest in our integration, and where do we invest in, which company do we invest in hoping that we will go through to revenue. And and the other thing kind of alongside that is what can help us push that. And in terms of regulation, we deal in concrete, which is the world's second most used material behind water on the planet. And concrete's concrete wherever you go. There's different brand names, there's different textures, there's different qualities of it, but ultimately wherever in the world you go, it's there. Yet when we're scaling, we would have to kind of lobby in each country to bring in digital concrete testing, because currently they build a sandcastle and they measure it, and it's how it's been done for decades. So and this is a global problem that we're trying to solve, and we need to have a global hat on. So, we all have our little regional kind of regulations and policies in Europe and the US, but without globally thinking, startups like mine may fall at many hurdles along the way through regulation, through lack of integration or investment in that, even though their technology is built and ready to go to market. So I think they're the two things I would kind of call on. It's, how do we look at regulation on a global scale? So if we have a digital concrete test in the UK, why can't we just take that straight to India if it delivers and has outcomes? If we have regulation or a protocol in America that startups can plug into and then big corporates can plug into, and we can share data like that without us all investing in our own integrations and APIs, then why can't we do that? So there are the two things that I personally see would help my business more as we're growing.
Thanks, Phil. Kit, how about you?
Yeah, Paul, I think you actually brought up a really interesting point in your question around affordability, because I think that's what everything hinges on if we're going to make technology scalable, if we're going to make it transferable. And ultimately, affordability comes down to the concept called a green premium. What's the additional amount we have to pay to go green? And the perfect example of this is electric vehicles. We're seeing their price come down every single year, and we're seeing their adoption go through the roof, and that's terrific. And with so many green technologies, Phil was just touching on it as well. How do you get a new technology to be affordable? Well, to begin with, you need that funding that either needs to be large-scale public investment. Innovate UK is the perfect example of this, where that funding's coming through. It can be private sector as well, which is also great. But ultimately, anything we can do to reduce the cost is the best thing possible, because ultimately we want to reduce the cost so that these innovations are affordable in low-income nations. Ultimately, climate change is going to be disproportionate to low-income nations, and so the more we can bring down that green premium, the better. Even better is if we can make the green premium negative, and so it's just a financially wise thing to do to go ahead and to have the most sustainable option. In our business, we analyze people's travel emissions and try and draw out insights. When we see that there's employees traveling every single month between, say, London and New York, often the businesses just don't know this. So we get to say to them, hey, well, what about if that was once every 2 months, once every 3 months? We can see their internal meetings. It could possibly be done digitally as well. And then the business gets to turn around and say, oh, we get a cash saving from this and we cut down on our emissions. It's a win-win situation. Finally, on a public policy level, I think we also need to start fostering, regulating and researching carbon markets more and more. If we have strong carbon markets, carbon credits, for example, then it's a great way that we can have money going from high-income nations towards low-income nations to lower, again, that green premium again, so they can afford innovative technologies. The media likes to portray carbon offsets as dead trees planted in the ground. The vast majority of carbon offsets, well over 90%, are really in the form of technology such as solar, wind, methane cogeneration. And so, the question is, can we get some of that money moving from the places like the UK to lower income nations, where it can then pay for, maybe it's a wind turbine when the most economical thing is a coal power station. How can we lower that green premium so that can happen? Offsetting is a delicate topic. I want to emphasize it's the last possible solution. We should always reduce carbon first, but if we are going to have emissions, then at least let's make sure it's regulated and it's going to a good place and really helping the rest of the world decarbonize as well.
Kate, I find it's interesting you mentioned, business travel there, and here we are today having the fourth of these sessions, all sat down in our homes or in our offices, talking to each other. And I suspect that when the world starts turning again, such sessions might end up being in a room together, and we'll all have travelled to get there. And that certainly would have been the way that, many of these type of things for various businesses would have been done in the past. Do you think that almost irrespective of COP26, we have almost stumbled into a new way, and our businesses willing to accept that because of what's happened with the pandemic?
Without a doubt. I mean, so many businesses are driven by the financials, and at the end of the day, if your travel budget's been cut 50 million, 100 million, because everyone started working digitally, and your business has grown over the last year, then going back to the old normal would be ludicrous. The business would end up spending more money. It would have higher emissions. So I think we've definitely reached a new normal. And I hope. I don't think travel needs to completely end. I think it can move to being smarter. More high-speed rail, more efficient planes, lots and lots of options out there. Of course, electric vehicles. But hybrid events are probably going to be the future from now on. I doubt we'll see events that are truly 100% in person, and same with business meetings.
Alicia.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, because your question started off with that global thinking, and Anthony's talked about systems. We've been talking about like almost breaking down boundaries in lots of ways globally, but also between policy and business and all the different boundaries we talked about. Just building on Kit's point, I mean, at KTN, we've always worked a little bit like this anyway, right? But part of the reason is because innovation obviously is about bringing diverse minds together, right? And I feel the younger generation, if I look at my son, he's only 11, like working digitally is totally normal, right? So the opportunity as leaders, we really need to challenge our thinking and use this opportunity to get rid of the boundaries, think globally, think about how we bring diverse minds, and talk about people with care, people that live in, rural areas, all of those things we talk about. That's how we challenge the system. That's how we bring these new ideas together. So I feel the opportunity is super exciting, because there's definitely been a mindset change, but we've not got to sleepwalk into the old school way of doing things. We have to embrace it and push the boundaries a bit, because this is where we'll change things. When you look at the global example, for example, like how many global meetings have you had that you wouldn't have had? There's lots of global meetings I've done in lockdown that I never would have traveled to that place in the last 2 years. What a great way to open and free your mind up a bit. So the opportunity is enormous if we take it.
Yeah, and I guess when you say we there, then there is an actual responsibility, regardless of, the business and the organisation, there is a fraction of that, the responsibility falls to the individual, within the business and within, the decision-making processes that they employ in order to go to a meeting or have a meeting online. I guess it filters down to that very basic level.
Sorry, Paul.
No, carry on, Alicia.
I was just going to say there's a really interesting talk I went to at COP26. It was actually about concrete, though. But the whole point of the talk was about bringing younger people into leadership discussions to challenge ideas, right? So it was, how do you change an industry like construction, for example, right? Concrete, right? Massive issues there. And they were saying we need to challenge the leadership. So challenge yourself. So bring in those new ideas. And I think that's where we need to be super open-minded when we think about the systems that we work in.
Phil, do you see, Alicia mentioned there about the younger generation and a lot of the traditional industries, certainly in the construction world, for example, a lot of the same modes and a lot of the same techniques have been employed for quite a long time. Do you see the younger generation being more driven towards, implementing those changes and sort of turning tradition around, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a construction veteran. I've been in the industry for sort of 16 years, both on the private sector in contractor land and working for the government down in Australia, delivering, Sydney Metro. And, it's a lot's changed in the last few years. Construction used to get dragged along kicking and screaming. And then the boardroom and the C-suite level started to realize, wait a minute, there's something changing here, and we can't just carry on the status quo. But kind of the guys on the ground, project managers who are delivering and operating every day, they were kind of ignoring the noise, and now it's really filtering down. So before, the carbon conversations would only be important at the C-suite level, and now it's getting closer and closer to the ground. And what we're finding is, if we can save a driver some money on fuel every week, he's interested, right? So we want to get all of the layers of the cake interested in the sustainability outcomes, because everyone can benefit, whether it be financially or from a CO2 perspective. And if you look at the composition of the boards of these big concrete companies, they're getting very diversified. So not just in age, but in balance of gender, and they're all very much pushing. If you look at one of the big four, Holcim, that they look like a sustainable business now, the way they've rebranded. It's green, it's circular, their logo's like a circular economy logo. And not only are they saying the right things, but they appear to be putting things in action as well. And, we're part of the plan that they've got in place. And there's cement neutral concrete coming out. So yeah, I think it's a combination of the pressure in the industry finally taking up, and the diverse mindsets, both at C-suite, and then also the older traditionalists realizing that there might be something in it for them in terms of cash benefits as well.
Thanks, Phil. Susanna, I wonder if you have any perspective on what's just me saying.
Yeah, I think just on that kind of how do we progress and move forward and innovate, I always talk internally here about if we want to change the outcome, then we have to change the lens. And so it's great to hear Phil talking about diversity on construction boards, which typically would have been at the very poor end of that spectrum. So I think beyond just the environmental space, beyond carbon, in all industries, we have to change that lens to get the different outcome. And so the more work that goes on, diversity in boards, diversity at all levels, that's the way to drive it. Absolutely, the point that Elsie was making, we have to open ourselves up to that. And those of us that are kind of into the autumns of our careers have to be responsible for pulling that through, for saying that this to be very general, you 8 white guys is not the way we are going to make different decisions. We have to mix this up, and we have to force that through.
Okay, thanks, Susanna. Okay, next question. We've spoken a lot in this series about technological advances and innovation to help us reach net zero. How much of this is about tech, and how much of it is about innovative behaviours, approaches, and changes in society? Phil.
I'm a bit biased, aren't I? Because obviously I have a tech company, but no, I think what I'm a big believer in is changing the systems beneath the consumer. So if someone buys, I mean, when I say to people that concrete's second most used material in the world, most people don't believe me. And they're stood on it. It's above them. It's below them. It's on every street corner, but it's all behind the hoardings and no one sees it. And there aren't hundreds of thousands of concrete trucks driving around London. There are about 1,000, and then they kind of blend in. But as soon as you mention concrete to someone, they start seeing concrete trucks everywhere. And so, what I believe in, consumer behavior change is really hard to do, and it takes a long time. So if we can go, actually, we'll just make the whole system kind of more sustainable. It sounds actually harder, but in many ways there's massive gains to be made. With what we're doing with net zero concrete in my industry, what we're doing with resource management, we can deliver 20, 30, 40% improved CO2 footprint in concrete within a few years, really. And for the consumer for all of us to stop doing that with avocados, for example, or to stop the consumer buying avocados, what have you got more chance of doing? Making the avocado less water intensive, farming it smarter, growing it closer in a smarter way to the markets, or telling everyone to stop eating avocados in November. I think, there's a challenge there. And I personally believe that technology people see sustainability as a compromise. And the less we can make it a compromise, and talking about the green premium, if we can make it not a compromise at a similar price by using technology and smart kind of business models, to make the consumer not even notice what's going on, that's how we're going to win on a massive scale. But obviously, it is incumbent of everyone to do their little bit. But I would never throw the ball over the fence to the consumer. I think it's, there's enough smart people in this world. The technology's there to just basically pull the rug under the consumer, and the system changes, and they can continue. Hopefully not their fast fashion habits where they're buying something, throwing it out the next day, but we can deliver more sustainable fabrics to them, more sustainable textiles. Cotton's terrible. Let's get rid of it. Let's use hemp. Lots of things we can do, and I think they would proliferate and scale quicker than consumer behavior change.
Yeah, okay, it's interesting. It's almost consumer behavior change by stealth.
Like ninjas. That's it. Sustainability ninjas.
Is there a question I asked earlier on to Anthony? Is there a gold standard example of that where it's already happening and we're kind of not aware of it?
I think it is happening, and I think the psyche of the of the global populace and the consumer particularly is changing. I think the global unconscious is moving towards, trying to make decisions that are, less damaging collectively and individually for the world we inhabit. But it is going to be slow. But we've seen the power of social media platforms in forcing opinions. We like to think of ourselves all as rational, independent operators, but we're just functions of our environment. And I think when we talk about systems change, we see governments trying to change things, but to be honest, governments are not connected with the particular challenges. They are recipients of messages from those that are possibly more close, like the large enterprises. And the large enterprises have to and are starting to take their responsibilities more seriously because they need to attract people and they need to attract capital. And I think, back to that sustainability as a compromise, that narrative is changing, and it's changing fast. We are seeing tens of trillions of economic opportunity on the other side at the beginning of the bio-revolution, at the beginning of the circular economy. And the smart money, as I say, is moving towards that. And the enterprises trying to attract the best talent, trying to attract capital, are recognizing that they have to play a disproportionate role in moving the needle towards this new future. And if they want to sell products to consumers, they're going to have to meet they're going to have to do that in a way that attracts the consumers. And the consumers are increasingly demanding. So I do see this opportunity and this, slow grinding overcoming of the inertia to change. I think, we have to, however, be really mindful of the greenwashing, and we talked, about it in, glossed over it a little bit here. But the fact is, when we talk about, net zero by 2030 or 2050, how do you achieve net zero? You have to, look for opportunities to achieve net negative. And so, how do we broadcast that as a narrative? Because focusing on net zero by that time will see us overshooting targets. I'm a systems engineer, so it's all about trying to figure out which levers you can pull in order to make significant change. And we as a business, our purpose is to accelerate the generative economy through the digital reinvention of science. And I love the fact that that's our purpose, because that's attracting some of the best talent, young talent in the industry. But we can't make a big difference unless we amplify our contribution by working with the biggest enterprises in the world to help them vector towards a better future. So we do see this huge potential to transform the system, and it is starting to move. But we have to be really wary of the greenwashing. We have to be really wary of the power of the social media infrastructure, the network that shapes our consciousness and our thinking, such that we are, moving to influence the consumers in the right way.
Yeah, it is very interesting. This has come up in previous sessions, when we live in the Instagram-fueled society, not just Instagram, all the other social media platforms too, where to some extent there is an element of fostering of the kind of, FOMO or this a must-have generation, and, buy it at 10 o'clock and it arrives at 10 o'clock in the morning kind of, pattern of consumption. But I guess on the other hand of that, the positive messages that can be moved around on social media that would hopefully go beyond greenwashing and would go beyond tokenism. Is social media, this is diverting from the agenda slightly, but it comes up in the course of the conversation. Can it play a role?
It must. It absolutely must. And we've got to figure out how we, deliver more reliable messages to broader communities of people than we're currently seeing. And we have to acknowledge the significant influence it plays on transforming people's perceptions and their behaviors as a function of that.
Susanna?
Sort of picking on that topic, but diverting it slightly, there's an Instagram meme going around that says something along the lines of, if the whole planet recycled perfectly, still 20 companies in the globe would produce 80% of the emissions. I can't exactly remember the stats, but we have to move to renewables, and it's a systems change, not a consumer change. Consumers are just consuming electricity. They can't really, they can vote somewhat with their feet, but the supply has to be there. We have to move, to renewables. used efficiently, stored properly, distributed properly. I think EVs is like the perfect example of where it's sort of working right and working wrong. Like EVs work, but mass adoption of the EVs requires behaviour change for which we do not have the infrastructure yet. You know, you still can't charge on most streets, and we have to put that in place for consumers to really do it.
Yeah, and even, you know, anecdotally, I came across a grant system here in Scotland recently that a friend of mine who is trying to install an EV charge point in his driveway didn't know anything about, you know, so there's perhaps a communication issue as well when it comes to these things, getting that level of messaging out there so that people who want it can actually access it and you know, play their part in moving the needle, as you say, Anthony. Alicia, I saw you scribbling some notes there.
Yeah, so I really love this question because it's something I feel really passionately about. Is if you look at all the strategies that come out of the UK about innovation, we focus so heavily on tech, right? And if you take, which I think is wrong, just to give you the main message of what I'm going to say, is when Anthony, if you look at the examples we've given today, right? Let's just take the agriculture one. And the massive impact of how our eating habits, our farming habits impact on the world. Why are we not tapping much more into economics, social sciences, and all of those systems approaches that we could? I think there's so much more we could do that's building on the really great ideas and research that's coming out of the UK that we could tap, well, not just the UK, globally, that's not just about tech. When I say just, tech's massive, obviously, that's what I've worked in a lot of my life, right? We've just started working with the Economic and Social Research Council to look at how we can link business with economics and social research to look at the attitudes, how businesses work, and using social sciences to influence innovation and our approach to innovation. I think the opportunity is massive. We just don't have the language. We don't know how to talk about it. We talk about technology readiness levels. That's how we talk about innovation in this system, right? We say technology readiness levels. I just think we don't know very well how to do it because we've not done it. So my view is the opportunity is enormous, right? This is all about people in society. That is what it's about. So it's not about either tech or society. It's about it working together. So I think we've not tapped into this enough, but the opportunity is massive.
We almost need a society readiness level for the technology that's coming in.
Exactly.
And we can benchmark it.
Yeah, and we've talked about, you know, adoption. This is a big thing in diffusion, how you have ideas that sit in one sector and how you move them across and the attitudes that come with that. There's a lot we need to be doing around this. I just think we're a bit uncomfortable with it because we don't really know how to tackle it.
Ken Brennan, your thoughts?
I couldn't agree more. It's businesses and society are made up of people, right? So we can make all the technologies in the world, but ultimately we need to get people to adopt them. So they're not separate problems. They're one and of the same, where, you know, we got to get the technology and then we got to get people using it. You know, a big part of what we do is helping businesses set carbon budgets so that every individual within the business can understand how much carbon they contribute and what they can do to reduce it. Otherwise, in so many companies and in society as a whole, everyone sort of shrugs their shoulders and says, the government will do something, you know, or the C-suite have said we're going to reduce by 50%, so we're going to reduce. But ultimately, you know, it takes action. It takes people doing things. It takes responsibility on someone's shoulder for them to then look at those technology innovations and to start adopting them. And the other side of the coin as well is I think most people do care about climate change. Surveys in the UK show that the majority of the population does. But for most people, they're not proactive like our viewers are today. They're not going out of their way to try and work out how to solve the problem. And that's maybe okay. But what it means is we have to make things effortless for them. It just has to be incredibly easy. You know, if someone's at a supermarket and they're looking at a shelf full of meat, do they know that the beef is 10 times worse for the environment than the chicken? And maybe if that was made really clear on the packaging, maybe they'd make a choice based on that. Maybe I'm completely wrong. But ultimately, if we give people that power and they start spending with their wallet and voting with their wallet, then that will trickle through the system and start making businesses that cater more towards that and start making a society that caters more towards that. So my point is they're one and the same problem. We've got to have the innovation alongside actually getting people to take on those innovations.
Phil?
Yeah, I think in our industry it's quite conservative. So to adopt new technology, there's just this massive amount of skepticism. So kind of what you've got to kind of do is you've got to point to things that worked elsewhere. And it's like, yeah, look at this worked over there, this worked over there. And the other thing is, you know, without measuring something, you can't really manage it. And so data is becoming this big proliferated kind of talking point. And we've all known the value of data for the consumer, and the big tech companies kind of sucked all the value out of the data for a consumer. But what is the value of the data for the planet, and how can we use it, and how can we drive that adoption? And the other big thing we've got to do is, it's one thing using the technology as a consumer or selling into a business, but then they've got to be willing to not just use the technology, but then share what we're learning from the technology. So, oh wow, we've got all this new data now, but wait a minute, we own that, right? So you can't share that. When it's like, well, kind of, we're all pushing in the same direction here. So we need to share your data so we can actually put best practices out there, put new industries and put new things in place in industry to drive it forward, learn from the mistakes that you've made, shout from the rooftops of the good things that you've done with the data. So there's that kind of, yeah, there's getting the consumer and the businesses to use this new technology, but then getting them to a level of confidence where they're happy to share their use of it and the data that comes from it, and good or bad, you know, the transparency that comes with it. And I think without that, it's going to be really hard to push it forward. And thankfully, with our early customers, you know, there's a real spirit of collaboration, and, you know, normally competitors, but they're kind of like, okay, let's figure this out. We know the industry going this way. Let's share this data and do lessons learned. And it's really encouraging to see. So yeah, maybe big businesses are easier to change than billions of people's minds. But we'll see how it plays out.
I guess you're almost preempting the next question there to some extent, Phil, when you talk about, you know, what we're going to discuss is the potential for innovation and technological advancement and development and so on becoming siloed. And to some extent, some of it's already been answered. We've talked about, you know, the dissemination of that information and the breaking down of barriers and kind of the geographical reach of innovation and so on. But it does seem to be, but, you know, picking up on a lot of what you're talking about, each of you, that does remain a real possibility, and it's a hurdle that has to be gotten over somehow. Really, is that these innovations aren't siloed. Alicia.
I think it's a really important question, and one that we're not doing well enough on at the moment, but people are really conscious of. So at KTN, I keep bringing up KTN, I'm not doing a sales thing, I'm just saying it's what we do, is working across different sectors and trying to share ideas. That is what we're doing all the time. That's so Anthony, you know, we talked in his intro, you know, he was working on one of the innovation networks. That's a classic example of where we're trying to bring people from different backgrounds, different sectors together to work and share ideas to come up with solutions or come up with innovations towards a bigger goal. So in Net Zero, we've got 2 innovation networks we're going to be introducing in the next few months. I think that I was looking back on the notes from the other sessions that we've had around this, and everyone loves talking about collaboration, right? We all know collaboration is important, right? But how do you actually do it, right? So we all know it's dead good, but how do you actually do it? So I think what I would say to any businesses that are dialing in, you know, please get in touch with us. We can help. There are organisations there that are set up to help those collaborations happen. And I just please say you get in touch, because that is the way it's going to go forward, but it's hard.
Phil, you have your hand up there.
Yeah, just on the collaboration piece, it's like the biggest buzzword in construction ever. And, you know, they have joint ventures on HS2 and they all work together, and the different joint ventures, you know, they collaborate and they share data. And I was at Digital Construction Week last week, and there was like, you know, 3 of the top global big 4 tier ones on stage talking about digital integration and data sharing. And basically how the conversation ended was, oh, well, we use these systems, you use those systems, and they don't really integrate that well. So I guess, you know, there's more work to be done here. And it's kind of like, this is what I was going back to about, you know, how do we get these systems talking to each other? Because, you know, otherwise a project like HS2 just gets dumped all of this disparate data from all these different joint ventures, all from different systems. And, you know, HS2 is creating a data lake and, you know, making companies ingest into it, which is fine for HS2. They can afford to do that. But imagine being an innovator trying to access data points from all these different tier ones. And we are the ones who have to build those integration points, and we don't have the money to do that, right? So it's kind of, it's really funny. And yeah, the collaboration piece is, it's key, and it's really important to scale our technologies.
Yeah, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the issues right now is a lot of companies are reluctant to share their data because they see it as their core, their I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but their opportunity to have a silo, keep it away from their competitors. They compete in it, competitive advantage. So very complete about that.
Yeah.
And one of the things we need is frankly for the government to step in and to start making policies that this data has to be shared. You know, airlines don't share their fuel burn data, but that's the best way we'll ever know how much fuel was burnt on a plane and therefore what their CO2 emissions were. But even on, you know, on a business to business level, you know, most companies in the UK do not need to report on their carbon emissions. But actually, if everyone had to, if that data was public, if it was shared, then again, their suppliers, their consumers, anyone can start making decisions based on that and can start, you know, proactively saying, well, we don't want to go with this company because its carbon emissions are too high. Then they're not taking the right actions, or they're cutting down the rainforest. Right now, no one really knows until there's a Guardian special or a Panorama special saying, oh, keep away from that company. So, you know, government policy is actually one of the best tools we can get to start fostering that collaboration, where maybe it's a bit sticky and people don't want to collaborate.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, you know, knowledge is power, I guess, really, and especially when it comes to the consumer and the making of decisions. Susanna, your thoughts?
I think we've created a really tricky situation for ourselves where ultimately the pressure to provide the solution sits with the innovators. So as an investor, I'm, you know, Phil and I know each other, you know, Cloud Cycle, early stage company. I say, oh, what traction have they got? What big contracts have they got? You know, how are they doing with the corporates? That's my investor perspective. Have they got traction with the corporates? And the corporate says to Phil, well, you need to do it like this for us. And ultimately, all the pressure falls on the innovator to provide the solutions, both for the corporate and the investor. And that just can't be right. Like, so we have to somehow flip that and get the big procurers, government and corporates, involved in taking that risk or sharing that risk or in some way shifting the responsibility away from the innovators who are limited in finance and resources and capacity because they are small and growing, and move it to the folks that are going to benefit from that. And I think that, you know, we are getting better at collaboration between large scale and small scale, but still there's a huge dissonance. And I think if we could crack that, that would really move things forward.
Okay, we only have a couple of minutes left, folks, but one final question. I suppose to some extent it picks up on what we've just been discussing. You know, in order to bring new minds and lived experience and new talent through, in order to make this industry accessible and attractive to them, what changes need to be put in place in order that these people do come to this industry and they do innovate and they do bring about the changes that need to happen? Kit, you nodded first.
Sure. Ultimately, it needs to be funding that's tied to job creation. No one's going to enter this industry if there's not a job. You know, very few people are going to start their own companies. So what we really need is where people do start companies, let's start getting funding that creates those jobs so people can enter the industry. And you know, that's ultimately what's going to create the next generation of people that maybe will work at companies and then set out and start their own innovations as well. But if we don't have funding that's tied to job creation, then ultimately people have to feed themselves at the end of the day. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be startups that we're talking about. It can also be apprentice schemes, right? So we're talking about trying to move the UK away from gas boilers and try and get us all to heat pumps. Well, what we need are more people that are trained to do that, a whole generation of people trained to fit those, maintain those. And again, that requires funding around jobs. And that's ultimately, in my mind, what the problem boils down to.
Okay, briefly, if you could, Phil, I see you nodding vigorously there.
Our biggest challenge in our business at the minute is attracting talent. However, the talent that we do have all quoted that, we've got ex-Dyson, ex-Uber people working for us, so a really stellar talent within the team, and they've all quoted it was a sustainability element that really encouraged them to leave their big comfortable job on a good salary in a big high growth startup and come work for our first hire from Dyson was just joining me and Russ as a 2-man team. So huge risk, families, kids in school, but the sustainability element is luring people in. So I think rightly so. And I think there's a whole generation of people that are seeing that. And the challenge here though is you've got, you can now work in London for Amazon on a Seattle salary, living in Wigan or living in Watford. And that's what the pandemic's done, right? So we're now fighting for candidates with Amazon and with all of these global companies because we're fully remote. So that's now put another cog in our works a little bit now. So it's like, well, how can we be nimble and how can we be more agile to attract those talents? But the sustainability element in the workforce is huge. And most of our staff quote that as to why they join Cloud Cycle, because of the impact that we can have.
Okay, excellent. I would have loved to come round all of you for an answer to that question, but I have one very quick question that will, for the first time, allow me to take advantage of the camera system we're using here and have a show of hands in answer to this question, because we are now out of time. Are we positive? Are we undecided? Or are we negative after the outcomes of COP26? If you would show your vote now. Okay. So we have 3 positives and 2 undecideds. Well, I'm glad you took part in that experiment, folks. Thank you very much. We have to end it there, I'm afraid. That's all we've time for today. I hope you've enjoyed this, our 4th and final session in the series Connecting for Climate Change, Unleashing Innovation Post-COP26. Today's session has been about enabling action, and you can catch it and our other 3 sessions on decarbonisation, circular economy and resilient places again on YouTube. It's been my pleasure today and for the last 3 weeks to host this diverse range of guests, chat and ideas and visions of the future. I've enjoyed it very much. I'm hopeful. I hope you are too. Thanks very much, folks. Bye-bye for now.